say thank you for having me here today. My name is Jonathan Wittiker. I'm a New York-based independent filmmaker. I work as a cinematographer, also as a director, and then an instructor for the New York Film Academy. What we're going to talk about today is I thought it'd be interesting to discuss what goes into cinematography, or director of photography. If you're not familiar with the term, one of the main positions on the filmmaking crew is the person who is in charge of the image. Everything that goes into the camera and the lighting falls under the realm of the cinematographer. And the cinematographer is one of the biggest collaborators with the director. And so when a director is breaking down, they're taking the story from the written word on the script and they're putting it onto the screen. They break that down into shots. Well, from that shots, we come up with a shot list. And then it's the director of photography who's responsible for taking that description on paper and actually putting it into images. Because as you know, we've all watched films. Filmmaking is a visual art form. Whereas, you know, we tell stories in many different ways. Oral, I could sit here and tell you a story. The written word tells a story. But filmmaking should be told through the imagery. And it would be slightly naive of me to say that after this next 45 minutes that we can all be cinematographers and that you'll all understand everything. But I hope just to give you a brief overview of what a cinematographer does, what they are responsible for, and understanding how the audience will read the imagery that they put on the screen. So, the art of storytelling through image. You'll see at the top here, I say the cinematographer is the author of the image. When I think about filmmaking, a lot of times I draw the analogy to writing. And whereas the director is the author of the performance, because day of shooting, once you've gone through all the pre-production, the day you're actually on set and you strike the lights and you get the camera and you say camera roll, the director is there to work with the actors. And the director, therefore, then is the author of the performance. The director shouldn't be concerned with the camera and the lenses and the light. They've already had that in pre-production. So then the cinematographer, that's their responsibility. So they are the author of the image. Some things that you must know, and this is what I want to briefly go through. I wish we had more time because we could spend days talking about it. Understanding cinematography could be a lifetime before you actually master it. I myself, maybe if I didn't introduce it, I myself have worked as a cinematographer on music videos, on feature films. I've recently gotten into 3D filmmaking. And so I have a vast experience, but spent years working through camera and lighting up to the point where now I'm also doing some directing. But anyway, some of the tools that we have as a cinematographer, one thing that you must know is composition. If you're not familiar with the term of composition, what I'm talking about is what is actually in the frame, right? What is within the four edges of my frame? How is the audience going to read that? Because we all, when we look at an image, we all read it. We come to it with our own personal experience. But there are some common things that we feel and that we understand just through the composition. And by composition, I mean where do we place our actors? And then also how do we shoot it through which lens? And you get a little bit into, it becomes a bit more esoteric, but you get into something called Gestalt theory. And the way in which we as Westerners read the screen, because this is the way that we actually learn, I'm going to turn my back on you, sorry. Because the way in which we learn to read, we read from screen left to screen right. So actually when we're looking at a photograph, we read it the same way. Well, so what does that mean? It means that if you put something on the screen right, imagine I had a character who was over here, that character unconsciously in the audience's mind is going to have more importance than a character on the left because we scan and our eyes rest there. And so understanding that, understanding the composition and how it's going to be read. I've never done an experiment, but it'd be interesting to see within this culture, because you read from right to left, I imagine it would be flip-flop. And it'd be interesting to do a study of that. I wish we had time for that today, but that would be my guess, just from experience. Also going into composition, where do you place the subject in relation to the screen thirds? You know, we have, if I divide the screen into thirds and I have the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third, each one of those is going to have a different meaning. And if you place someone at the top, again, it gives them the position of power. And we read that as if, you know, that they have a lot of importance. If we place someone in the middle, that's, that's normal. That's not really making a decision. You're letting the audience objectively understand who this character is. You're not forcing their understanding of it. If you place someone in the bottom third, now you're relegating them to the bottom third of the screen, meaning that they lack importance. And I don't know if it's a film that everyone is familiar with, but there was a very popular film that came out of England called The King's Speech. In The King's Speech, I remember watching it for the first time in the movie theater, and I saw that every time the king would go to the speech therapist, into the actor Geoffrey Rush's office, he was always at the bottom third. And there was all of this, what we call in filmmaking, negative space at the top. So the top 2/3 were empty, and the bottom third was where they put the king. And I started thinking to myself, why are they doing that? Because as a filmmaker, I can't just watch films and enjoy them. I have to think about, why is the camera there? Why are they lighting it this way? And so I started thinking about it, and it dawned on me what the filmmaker was saying, and what everyone was picking up on unconsciously, was that, yes, you might be the king, but when you're in my office, you don't have that importance. You're just another patient. So all of this, your highness, and all this royalty goes out the window because you're a patient, I'm a doctor, and that's the relationship that we're establishing here. And you're telling that just through the composition. I know I was talking about how we read the screen. Also, screen direction, it's interesting, and there's been studies of this. Now, when I say screen direction, I mean if someone is moving across the screen. If we have an object or a subject moving across the screen, the way in which we Westerners read it, if someone is moving from screen left to screen right, unconsciously we feel as if they are going on a journey. It feels like they're going somewhere, that they're leaving home to go and do this incredible journey or wherever they're going. Conversely, if they're moving from screen right to screen left, that's regression to us, because that's the backwards from progression. So we feel as if they're returning home. I'm going to show you an example of this later on today, and I'm going to show you a clip, and we're going to break it down. But understanding composition, that's one of the first things that we talk about in cinematography. Because one of the things that you don't want to do, I always tell my students that there really are no rules to filmmaking. I mean, if I have any filmmakers in this class, you might be saying, well, what about the 180-degree rule? Things of that nature. So there are rules, but you can break them. But you must know what you're doing. The only mistake you can make in filmmaking is if you make an unintended consequence, meaning that you don't understand what you're putting on the screen and how the audience is going to interpret it. And so you must always understand, if I place the camera here or if I place the subject there, how is the audience going to understand that? And we've learned a lot of this from painting. If you want to study composition, we've studied the master painters from the Renaissance era, your Rembrandts and your Caravaggio, and that's what we teach in the classroom. And first we understand that, and then we actually go into the moving image. So that brings me to camera placement then. So like I said, so the director will give me a shot list, right? And the shot list will say, okay, the shot, let's say it's scene 1, shot 1A. They want a medium close-up single on my subject. Now, I may be speaking in a vernacular with which you're not familiar, but let's say that a single means that there's a shot of one person, medium close-up, maybe the shot is like this. So that gives me some information, but now I have to think as a cinematographer, what is going on in the story? Where do I place that camera? And when I say place the camera, I understand the shot size, I understand who's in it, but where do I place it? Where do I place it in relation to eye line? Eye line means the character's eyesight. Where are they looking? Their eye line. And just by moving the camera, imagine this is my camera. Right here would be at my eye line. If I place it there, that feels normal, right? We feel like we're on level with the character. Again, a very objective viewpoint. Now, if I drop that camera lower, it has a completely different feel. It's still the same shot, right? It's a medium close-up single, but it feels completely different. And the way in which my audience is going to read it is going to be completely different. Let's say if I take that camera and I move it up here, and now I'm shooting down on the subject. That too will have a different feel to it as well. And so it's not just arbitrary. We think about where we're placing that camera and the effect it's going to have. Also, not just height, but where do I place that camera in relation to the eye line degree-wise? Let's say that you, everybody in this room, you're my cameras, and I'm the subject, and I place the camera out here. This is what we would call 90 degrees. So I'm 90 degrees from the subject. Well, if you're looking at me now, you can't see my entire face. Without seeing my entire face, without seeing my full expression and what's going in, not seeing the eyes, both eyes, you really don't feel an association with me, right? It feels like I'm not talking to you. It feels like you're removed from me. Well, if that's the intention of the director, that's a great placement for that. Let's say that the director doesn't want you as the audience to associate with that character. Well, that would be a good choice. But let's say the director does. Another placement might be at 45 degrees. Now, for most of you, some of you here, we're almost straight on, but for most of you, you're at 45 degrees. It's opening up the face. What does that do? It starts to make a stronger connection to the character. The audience now can see a bit of my other eye. You can see more of my expression. You can see more of what's going through my mind. And now we're starting to feel some sympathy for the character, a connection, an association. Let's say now that I take that camera and now we're shooting head on. Now you can see both of my eyes. You can see full frontal of what's going through my mind, my expressions, my body language, my movement. Now you're feeling a much stronger connection to the character. And so when we're thinking about it, when we're deciding where to place that camera, this is what we're thinking of. We're thinking of, okay, whose scene is this, right? Who do I want the audience to associate with? And just by where I place that camera, and I can place it anywhere. Those were just 3 examples. I can move that camera, I can put it even behind me if I want. But just from where I place that camera, it's going to have a different impact. And understanding that is what you must understand that in order to make that decision. So let me show you just some quick examples. They're a little bit comical. But so here, as I was saying, in relation to height of camera, the camera in this situation is placed at the height of the subject's eyes. Right? Again, this is pretty objective. We're shooting full on, frontal. If he were not wearing sunglasses, we could see his eyes and we can understand what is going through his mind. But this feels natural to us, right? Because we're at eye level. If I then, the same size shot, I drop that camera, how does this feel different from the last one? Much different. Well, the background has changed. We're seeing the ceiling. It's a low angle. And what does that do? The difference between that, how does that make you feel about this character? It's pretty objective, right? Now if we're here. Yeah, he has a lot more power. He's in a position of power because we are below him and we're looking up at him, and it makes him seem larger in the frame. It makes him seem like he's in a position of power. It's kind of, I always tell my students, it's kind of like why I stand and you sit. Because now you're looking up at me and I should be in a position of power. I have the microphone too, so that helps. But this is something that we do all the time. And now this is an extreme example. I dropped the camera really low for this to really emphasize the point. But just by shifting it a little bit, the audience will start to, on the unconscious level, start to feel that. And they'll feel that this person is in a position of power. It's also something that we do a lot too, to force perspective. I don't know if anyone's familiar with films like Harry Potter, where you have the shots of Hagrid, who is supposed to be a giant, right? Well, the man is not really a giant. He's a big man to begin with. But if we place the camera here and shoot up at him, he looks like he's much larger than he is in reality. This guy's not that big of a guy, I can tell you. He's about my height, and I'm not too big. So let's look then at the opposite of this. So this is my good friend Sunny. We were in India together. If we look at this now, my camera is up here. How do you feel about this character? Yeah, he feels tiny. They're actually, both of these guys are about the same height. But if I were shooting a scene between the two of them, and let's say that I was shooting a scene and they're having an argument, who in this argument has the upper hand? Well, if I'm cutting back and forth, this guy, right? That's pretty obvious. Again, I was using extreme examples, but just to get you to think that, it's important that you understand placing that camera is going to have an impact on the audience. Let's then talk about something else that we have as a cinematographer. It's very important that we understand this. One of the main tools that you have are lenses. What lens am I using? And because each different lens, we think about lenses in three main categories. Now, of course, there are hundreds and thousands of different types of lenses, but we break them down into three main categories. And I'm not talking about zoom versus prime, that's something different, but I'm talking about the three lenses that we have. We have a wide-angle lens, we have a normal lens, and we have a telephoto lens. And so, again, the director, using that same example, let's say it says, we're going to do a medium close-up single on our subject. Now I say, okay, well, I've decided where I'm going to place the camera, but now what lens am I going to use? Because each one of these lenses has a different feel to it. Different feel communicates something different. So a wide-angle lens. A wide-angle lens has the largest field of view. Well, what does that mean? Field of view sounds like a fancy term, but it means what can I see? What is in my eyesight? So if I were shooting and I wanted to see both halves of this room, I would need a wide-angle lens. So that's one of the choices we make. Okay, how much do I need to see in the frame? It also has the largest depth of field. Now, if you're not familiar with photography, this may be a term, depth of field. What does that mean? It simply means the area of acceptable focus, or the area of focus. So having a large depth of field would mean that the person in the front row here would be in focus, so would the person way in the back. That's a very deep depth of field. And wide-angle lenses inherently have a larger depth of field. So if I need to be able to clearly see, focus, near and far, a wide-angle lens is the lens that I would most likely like to use. It's not the only contributor to depth of field. There are other factors, but lenses is certainly one of them. The lenses are the fastest. When I say fastest, you know, in film we reference the speed a lot. We talk about the speed of the film stock, the ISO. We talk about the frame rate. But here I'm talking about what is the maximum iris opening. So iris opening, again, if you don't have a photography background, this may be slightly over your head for now, but the f-stops. How large can I make that iris opening? Wide-angle lenses, by nature, are faster lenses. They have a wider iris opening than, say, a telephoto or a normal. So they're better in low light conditions. So maybe that goes into my decision-making. One thing that you must know, it's really important, is that a wide-angle lens exaggerates distance. It actually makes things seem as if they're farther apart than they are in reality. So what does that mean? It means if I throw on a wide-angle lens on this camera here, and I turn and I shoot in that direction, you may only be, I don't know meters, but let's say that you're 20 feet from me. Well, it might look like you're 40 feet from me, because it makes things seem like they're more spread out. It's an illusion. It's perspective. That's inherent in a wide-angle lens. Well, if it does that, if it exaggerates distance, then what does it do to speed if something is moving towards the camera or from the camera? Let's say that you're shooting a car race scene or a car chase, and you have the camera here low, and you want to see a car come zooming towards the lens. If I throw on a wide-angle lens, it's going to make it look like it's moving faster. Why? Because if that 20 feet looks like 40 feet, but it only takes 2 seconds for that car to go that 20 feet, and now it looks like it only took 2 seconds for that car to go 40 feet, it's going to have the illusion as if it's moving faster. It also distorts the face. Because it exaggerates distance, I'm going to show you an example. If you use a wide-angle lens on someone's face, it becomes kind of garish and cartoonish. It's not very flattering. So if you're trying to do, you know, a nice soft romance film, and you put a wide-angle lens and put it in someone's face, it's going to have a comedic feel to it, because it just makes it look strange. What happens is, because it exaggerates distance, it makes the nose stretch out and look larger. It makes the eyes farther set back, the ears back, and so it stretches the face. So you really don't want to use a wide-angle lens in a close-up unless, of course, that is your intention. There's a filmmaker in America called Gilliam, and he does a lot of these kind of fantastical, kind of really strange, distorted films. And he likes to use a wide-angle lens in a close-up, but that fits the tone of his story. And so that works. But if that's not your intention, you don't want to do that. You might find that you're making a horror film and it becomes a comedy because you're using the wrong lens. Normal lens. A normal lens is simply the most human-like. In relation to field of view, in relation to depth of field, it doesn't do anything to the space. It doesn't exaggerate it. It makes it normal. So that 10 feet, that 15 feet, looks like 10 to 15 feet. And that's a normal lens. Telephoto, a telephoto, or sometimes called a long lens, is the reverse of a wide angle. So whereas the wide angle had the large field of view, the telephoto has a narrow field of view. So telephoto, I might only see this much, where wide angle would be this, normal might be this. So it has a very narrow field of view. It has a shallow depth of field, meaning that you can isolate your focus. So if I throw in a telephoto lens and I throw my focus to this gentleman here, everyone else could be blurred in the background, which can be very important. Sometimes you want to do that. You want to force the audience's eyes, because what you're doing is you're always directing the audience, right? We're trying to give them the information that they need to know and nothing else. If I use selective focus, there's nothing else for them to see but what I'm focused on. And this is also when, I'm sure you've seen this in many films, where they do something called a rack focus, where the focus will start here and then you shift it. The foreground object goes blurry, the background object comes into focus. And so you can do that with a shallow depth of field. Also with a shallow depth of field, you must understand that it has an impact on the audience. I was watching a film once in a theater called Derailed. If you haven't seen it, don't go see it. It's not a great film. But it does star Clive Owen and Jennifer Aniston. Anyway, it was a psychological thriller. And I realized about 15 to 20 minutes into the film, I started to get uncomfortable. Usually that's my indicator if I don't like a good film, if I'm start shifting and I'm uncomfortable and I'm moving around a lot. And I started to think, as I do as a filmmaker, why do I feel uncomfortable? And I realized that they were always using a shallow depth of field. And all you could ever see was the foreground element. But because it was a psychological thriller with action and the drama and there were killings and things of that nature, what would happen is you would see an object coming from the background, completely out of focus, not knowing what it is, approaching our protagonist. Well, as humans, we like to know, right? We don't like when people withhold information. So it started to make me feel uncomfortable and ill at ease. But again, that's effective for the genre that they were working in. So they were actually using the tools properly. Telephoto lenses are slow, meaning that they have a relatively high f-stop or just a smaller iris opening. So they won't allow as much light to come into the camera as a wide-angle lens. So they're not so great in low light conditions. Just like a wide-angle exaggerates distance, a telephoto lens compresses distance. So it makes things seem as if they are nearer than they are in reality. So again, I'll go back to my example. That may be 10, 15 feet, but now it's going to look like it's 5 feet away. It's going to make everything seem compressed. And so let's say that you're telling a story about being on a busy street in New York City, and you want to make it seem like it's really densely populated, and that you feel, the character feels claustrophobic. Right? Because what we're always thinking about as a cinematographer is how are we using the medium as a visual metaphor for what is going on in the mind of the character. That's a bit wordy, but I think you understand that, right? How is the visual a metaphor for what the character's feeling? So let's say if the character is feeling it's their first time in New York City, oh my God, there's so many people, I feel like everyone is near me and around me, and the buildings are tall, everything, they start to feel claustrophobic. Well, by using a telephoto lens, you will emphasize that because it'll make like everything seem stacked on top of each other. And so we're using the lens to tell our story. Because it compresses distance, it makes movement seem slower, right? That makes sense. Just like the wide-angle lens makes movement seem faster, telephoto makes it seem slower. Because if that 10 feet is rendered to look as if it's 5 feet, but it still takes this gentleman 5 seconds to walk that 10 feet, it's going to take him 5 seconds to walk that 5 feet. It looks like he's moving slower. And this is also a trick that they use quite frequently, especially in horror films. Have you ever watched a horror film where there's someone who's trying to get away from the bad person, and they're running and they're running and they're running, and you're saying, go, 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 get away, get away. And it seems like they're running, but they're not getting anywhere? A lot of times that's just a perspective trick from a telephoto lens. They are actually running, but it doesn't look like they're going anywhere because the distance is compressed. And so it seems like they're making up no ground. So we use our lenses quite a bit. It's one of the biggest tools we have as a cinematographer. Let's look at some examples. There's my friend Sunny again. This is a wide-angle lens. Do you see what I mean by it distorts the face? I mean, this seems comical, right? I mean, his nose looks larger, his eyes farther set back, the face has a bit of distortion to it. That's what a close-up with a wide-angle lens looks like. Now, if you're trying to do some beauty photography or you want to make your main character look good, probably not your best choice, right? Because that feels funny. Let's also, I want to point out now, let's look at this column here in the background, because I'm going to switch my lens now to a normal. Here is a normal lens, where the space is rendered normally. It's the most human-like. You'll see that there's no distortion to the face. That's actually how Sunny really looks. But now that column, which was farther back, and the wall behind him, the wall started to move in. That's the real distance. That column started to move in. But his face is the same size in the shot, but it seems like the wall has moved in because I switched my lenses. Now let's look at a telephoto. This is a telephoto lens. Now the column has almost pushed all the way past my frame because my field of view has changed, but it moved up. Now I can see that door. It looks like it's right behind him, right? Because it compressed that space. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can see it. When I took this shot, he's a little bit out of focus because my depth of field got very shallow, and I didn't do a good job of finding focus on him. But you can see that's a smaller depth of field. So lenses, those are some of the examples. Again, you have your wide angle, your normal, and your telephoto. And it's one thing, we don't have time to go over it today, but you have to understand that a wide angle lens, a normal, and a telephoto, they change dependent upon the format you're shooting on. So this is the camera I have here next to me is a digital camera. It has a full 35 millimeter sensor inside of it. So a normal lens would be a 50. Anything double 50 or over becomes a telephoto. Anything less than 50 becomes a wide angle. If that weren't a 35, let's say it were a 16, it would be half of that. A normal would be a 25. A 50 would be a telephoto. Anything less than 25 would be a wide angle. But so that is different per the format. Lighting. Lighting is also very big in cinematography. And we could spend days talking about lighting. But what light are you using and why? And how are you helping that to tell your story? Because lighting really tells you so much about the story. It sets the tone, or the mood, if you will. It also gives you information about the time of the day, the location, and the character. And so we use lighting a lot to help tell our story. I mean, even if you just look at the light here, I mean, this light on me, sorry, cameraman, I'm going to slide over here a bit. If you look at this light on me here, I've put some diffusion in front of this light, and you can see that's a bit softer, as opposed to if I took that off, it would be a hard quality light. It's going to have a different feel to it. So understanding which light to use and why. So lighting is big. Again, I kind of breeze over that because we don't have much time to talk about it. I wish we had time to set up some lights and do a little demonstration. Camera movement. Camera movement also falls under the responsibility of the cinematographer. And so when I say camera movement, I'm saying, how does the camera move and why does the camera move? Those are two questions you must ask. Because if at all, sometimes the camera does not move. But let's say that you do decide that you want to move the camera. Well, how should that camera move? Should we put it on a dolly? So it's a nice smooth movement and it's a tracking shot moving with our subject. Or what if I put it on a crane so it goes up high in a big sweeping move and then comes down? Or what if I go handheld? I actually take the camera and I put it on my shoulder and walk with the camera following my subject. Each one of those choices, they may all be tracking shots, but each one is going to have a different feel to it. Right? Handheld has a very kinetic kind of crazy feel to it because there's a lot of movement to it. And that's very effective when you're shooting war sequences or fights or chase scenes, because again, going back to the visual metaphor, for what's going through the mind of the character. When you're in the midst of a battle scene or a fight, things are moving fast and it's chaotic and you don't always see everything. And so a handheld camera would be perfect for that. Again, if you're shooting a romance scene between two lovers walking down the beach, having that handheld camera movement is not going to be a great choice, because it's supposed to be a moment of calmness and tenderness, hopefully, right, if the couple is getting along. And so maybe I'm going to use a Steadicam, or I'm going to use a dolly. But it's also important to think about, should the camera move? Because the camera shouldn't always move. The camera should move for a reason. It should be motivated. Well, I always tell my students that if you're going to move the camera, it needs to be motivated by something. Well, what do I mean by that? Motivated. Let's say that, again, every one of you is a camera. Follow me, and I'm walking across this room. You're all panning with me, right? You're all panning your heads to follow my movement. Well, that would be motivation. It's motivated by the camera, by the character's movements. And so that would make sense. If you just arbitrarily start moving the camera around for no good reason, you take the audience out of the story and you make them aware of the fact that they're looking through a camera, which is usually not what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to have them forget that they're looking at a film and actually be involved in the story. Anytime that you move the camera unmotivated, you're pulling them from that story, from that voyeurship, and actually making them cognizant that they're looking at a recreation of reality as opposed to what you want them to think, that it's reality on the screen. And sometimes I say the camera shouldn't move at all. I mean, let's say that you're doing a film about someone who is a prisoner in a cell, and most of the scenes take place within this cell. Well, how do you think that person feels locked up in a cell? As if there's no freedom, right? So if I move the camera around a lot, that doesn't connect with the way the character's feeling. So maybe I choose to use all static shots. Now, I can move the camera and cut different shots, but the camera doesn't move within the shot. And having a static camera is going to be a visual metaphor for what's going through the mind of the character. Now let's say that they get released from prison because they realize that he was wrongfully convicted, and now he's out. And now all of a sudden you move the camera, and the camera goes on a Steadicam, and you get that sense of freedom of movement. Again, that would fit the story. That would go along with the story. So camera movement. Again, these are just going to make sure that we're doing okay on time. These are just some of the tools that we have as a cinematographer. But what I try to emphasize is that you make sure that you're making a decision that is based on the story. Every decision you make as a filmmaker, whether you're in hair and makeup, whether you're in lighting, whether you're the cinematographer or the director, you always have to go back and say, why am I making this decision? And the answer has to be because it serves the story. Right? We don't just arbitrarily say, hey, it'd be really cool if I put the camera up here. That's going to be a cool angle. Or, hey, you know what? I always wanted to use a dolly, so let's throw that on a dolly, and we're going to move that back and forth and back and forth. No. You have to say, how is this relevant to the story? What am I saying? How is the audience going to read that? You always must ask yourself, why? Why? And if you don't have a good answer as to why you're moving the camera, why you're using a particular shot, why you're using certain wardrobe, then you need to go back and rethink it. Go back to the drawing board. Again, because the only mistake that you can really make in filmmaking is having a consequence that you did not intend. And it happens a lot with novice filmmakers. You know, they'll make this horror film that when they play it in front of the audience, everyone's laughing. And they didn't mean to go out and make a comedy, but because the way in which they shot it, the way in which it was lit, and then the acting becomes funny, and that wasn't their consequence. That wasn't their intention, but it was the consequence. So I could do, if anybody has any questions, I could take a brief question. What I do want to do is show you a clip from a film, and I want to break down that clip, because I think it's in itself, it's maybe 2 minutes long, but I think it's kind of masterful, the way in which the cinematographer, Conrad Hall, and the director, Sam Mendes, introduced the main character of a story. But before I get to that, if there's a question that is relevant to what we just went through, I'd be happy to take it now. Okay, let's watch the clip, and then we'll have more time. I also will be here all day at our booth, so if you have questions, you can certainly come see me. Now, I don't know that there is sound to this, but considering that we're talking about a visual medium, sound shouldn't matter. I always tell my students that if you turn the sound off, or if the film is in a different language that you're not familiar with, you should still understand 90% of that film. Why? Because films show, they don't tell. So if they did their job well, you should be able to understand what's going on in the story. Can everybody see the screen? Is it too washed out? Some things I want you to think about. Think about the composition. Think about the screen direction, the camera movement, the camera height, the lenses they're using. After we watch this once, we'll go back and we'll break it down shot by shot. Let's see, just from that brief introduction, and feel free to call it out, what do you understand about this character, if anything? What is your impression of the character that we just met? It's a very brief introduction, right? That was a minute and a half, 2 minutes? I'm sorry? Joyful? Okay. Why do you say that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, and when you say that because of the right, the move from right to left, he actually was going home, right? He was leaving the beach, he was on his way home, he was moving from right to left. Always there was the continuity of screen direction. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's just give me an impression that what's happening really. It's just give me an impression that I wanted to follow really the story. What's next?
Mm-hmm.
No, and I like really how the camera just move from in front of the bicycle coming and to take just from the side. How is he going? And just it suddenly he fell down. And it wasn't like he fell down like something he was playing with his brother maybe.
Yeah.
So it's just really, I like it, but still there is a point that I wasn't that much comfortable why it was long period that I was really curious what is next and what is happening until he came to the shop and I find he's a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. That's a great reading of it. So some of the things, I don't know before she grabbed the microphone if you could hear it, but some things that she pointed out were that the opening framing, we talked about composition. This is something that we didn't talk about, but the screen has, the edges of the screen have energy to them. And if we place something directly in the middle, all energy comes in towards the middle. There was really nowhere else for your eye to go. Right? If you when we watch it again, you'll see the opening shot. Instantly your eyes are drawn right to the center of the screen. Well, that communicates to us that hey, this is our main character. It also could communicate to you too that there's a lot of pressure on this solitary figure. It's a person who's alone, isolation, but the camera is pushing in, so it's bringing us into his story. Then it cuts to white, and one thing that you pointed out that you noticed is that the character is moving from screen right to screen left. Everybody else is moving from screen left to screen right. What does that communicate to you? Well, it shows you that he's an individual, That here's a person who is almost like a salmon swimming upstream, going against the grain. In America, we have a phrase that says marching to their own drummer, meaning that they live the life their own way. What you also said, too, is that you weren't sure if he was a boy. You didn't know who this character was until he pulls his scarf down in the shop. When we look at it again, in the shop, look at where they place the camera. They have what is called an over-the-shoulder shot. But it's technically really not an over-the-shoulder because traditionally, you could shoot over the shop clerk's back. Imagine the camera were here shooting over the clerk's back to the kid. But what would that have done? That would have been placing the camera above him. Notice here, they never place the camera above the character's eye line, which gives the character weight. Yes, he's a boy, but he has equal importance, if not more, than the adult that's in the room. Also, he steps outside and he smokes a cigar. By smoking, or a pipe, sorry. By smoking a pipe, at least in our culture, that's uncommon for a boy of that age to do that. So that's saying that, you know, not only does he feel isolated, he's alone, he goes against the grain, he's going against the current of life. He's also a grown man, not a grown man, but he feels like he must be older than he really is in reality. Then he gets back on his bike, and now he's still going home, and in the end, his brother throws a snowball, and he falls and plays dead. So he actually is a kid. And so he is just a child who feels like he must be older than he is. And all of that is communicated in a minute and a half. And that's when I say telling the story through the images, I think this is a good example. Okay, I've been told that I have less than 5 minutes left. Was there anything that anybody that you saw different in that you wanted to point out? Oh, that's okay. That's fine. I was saying, on second viewing, was there a deeper understanding or anything else that you had maybe wanted to point out or to question or to talk about? I'm sorry? In 3 minutes? Well, I don't know. We could do it very quickly. So you know what? Here's what we'll do. About the lighting? All of the lighting there seemed to be very soft, yeah? I didn't talk much about lighting.
Yeah, I want just brief things about it.
Mm-hmm.
What difference between the kind of lighting, how it's from the front, and you know what I'm going to tell you about.
Yeah, you know what? I apologize. Let's definitely hold off. Come see me at the booth, and we can discuss lighting for as long as I'm there. I'll be there all day. But lighting is something that, you know, we could teach a month-long course on lighting and what light to use and when and how it affects the audience. In this one here, most of the light was soft. There was some overexposure, of course, in the beginning, but it didn't have a harsh feel to it, not to me, although the color palette was certainly almost black and white. All of the characters were in black, moving in the opposite direction, the white, bright snow, so that had a feel to it, too. There is something to be said about black and white. That wasn't black and white, but the color palette was very desaturated. What happens is, as the audience, if something is in black and white or desaturated, we project color into it, therefore becoming more emotionally involved. And so by doing that, we feel a stronger connection to the material. There are many theories about color and lack of color, but a lot of that has to do with the lighting and also the costume design, the production design. What I did want to say really fast is that I am here on behalf of the New York Film Academy. We offer courses in filmmaking, so directing, in which you would learn cinematography, editing, screenwriting, am I forgetting one? I don't know, producing, and acting, of course, directing actors. We also offer degrees in acting, screenwriting, photography, and cinematography. We are approved by the Cultural Mission, so you can apply for full scholarship through that program. We have branches, our two main branches are in New York and in Los Angeles. If you are to take a degree program, you have to do at least 1 year in Los Angeles. It's actually a good thing because the capital of filmmaking in America, at least, arguably the world, are New York and Los Angeles, and they have two different feels to them. My time is up. It's been a pleasure speaking to you all today. Thank you for being here. Hopefully I didn't bore you. Hopefully you leave here with somewhat of a deeper understanding of cinematography. But again, we only had 45 minutes to discuss it. Come see me and we can spend a year or two together talking about cinematography. Thank you for your time.